I've got several members of staff with me here tonight, as well as members of the supervisor's offices and planning commission, and we can introduce them in due time. In terms of housekeeping, this is a public meeting that's been advertised, and so as part of that, we will be recording this in case anybody wants to revisit what's been discussed. I'm going to go ahead and start that recording now, and we will go ahead and get this going. So let's see here. I see it's already been started. Thank you, Graham. Yep. Now, this evening, I'll go ahead and share my slide deck here, and from there, we can kind of get a sense of what we'll be covering this evening. So the Fairfax Center Area study, you'll recall from our task force kickoff. One moment here. Okay. Our authorization from the Board of Supervisors is to look at the land use guidance for land units A and B of the Fairfax Center Area in our comprehensive plan. We're defining this as the core area of the suburban center. A part of this is the transportation analysis that goes along with our phase 3 study, which we have currently brought the consultant Farron Pierce back into the picture after starting the analysis. They're finishing up the existing conditions, and after they do that, they will be working on any future land use scenarios that this group proposes to be studied. We expect to bring that existing conditions report back to you all in the fall once that's been completed, but that's currently underway now, and we should be getting the results of that here within the next few months. In addition to this, we'll be looking at any editorial updates for any new planned and existing development in the core area. You may recall from our last meeting, phase 2 left off in 2016, and so there's been a few plans and a few new developments that have happened since that time. So we'll be doing some editorial updates. And then as part of the authorization, we've been asked to consider the reserve at Fairfax Corner for a 0.42 FAR residential use. We'll get into explaining what FAR is exactly. It's a measure of intensity. And we've since also had another request from the reserve to increase that FAR, which we'll discuss here briefly. In terms of the agenda for this evening, we have a lot of information to cover. I know it's going to be a lot, and I do want to make sure that we are making the best use of the task force's time. To that end, what we'll do is after each of these modules, we'll take a pause. We'll answer any questions from the task force, any comments, and then we'll move on to the next module. And then we will provide a time for public comments and questions at the end of the presentation in order to make sure that we are able to cover all of the material. But we'll start off talking about the core area vision and goals. We'd like to provide a summary of our public outreach that we've conducted to date. I'd like to do an update on the government center visioning, that's a sub-project of phase 3. And then we'll have a discussion on the development patterns historically in the core area and kind of how this compares to the rest of the county. And so with that, let's go ahead and get started on talking about the core area vision and goals. This is all part of the Fairfax County's comprehensive plan. This is in the Area 3 guidance for the Fairfax Center Area. So for those of you that would like to look at that plan text, we'll provide a link to that, and that is all delineated as part of this plan. You may recall this graphic from the last presentation that we did in terms of how the Fairfax Center Area itself is organized. You see here on the outskirts, we have suburban neighborhoods and low-density residential areas. And then we have the suburban center itself, divided into a non-core area and a core area. The general idea here being is that the most intense type of development would be found in the core area, and then it would taper off into the non-core area and then the low intensity suburban neighborhoods and residential areas. But again, this core area that we're mostly focused on here in the phase 3 study is really designed as a place where this is the highest level of intensity of development. The suburban center itself is going to be a premier place to live, work, and play. We have the intensity being provided in the core area primarily around the idea that Metro would come here in the future. We know that this is not something that's immediately going to occur, but it could happen within the next 40 years or so, maybe 30 years. But in any case, now is the time to start that planning process and to really start looking at the types of development that may encourage Metro to come and be able to kind of prime the pump, if you will, in terms of the level of development that's provided around that Metro station. And so as we talk about these concepts, we'll get into these into some greater detail, but you'll hear terms such as transit-oriented and then compact mixed-use development and things that have more of an urban character. And we'll talk about exactly what that means for the area. I should mention here that the goal here is not to redo the concept for future development for the core area, but more so to hash out the specifics of what that development will look like going forward. So as part of the core area vision, the plan delineates many different concepts and recommendations for how to implement this vision. But what I've done here is I've pulled out some of the key concepts along our different elements here. We've got land use, transportation, urban design, and environment. And you'll see that these are common elements within our comprehensive plan, both at the county-wide policy levels, at our area-wide guidance, and then down to the specific, in this case, to the specific suburban center level. But you can see here that in terms of land use, we're looking at more of a core area that's focused on public transit, that transit-oriented I mentioned earlier. It's mixed use, focused with ground floor retail to really activate those street spaces. Looking at minimizing surface parking, and so where we have surface parking, we would want to convert those surface lots into either parking structures or parking along the streets. Really moving the area away from an auto-centric form into more of a pedestrian-friendly form, and then taking the suburban form and transferring that into more of an urban character within the core area surrounding that future metro station. And you can see some of these concepts are really mirrored in the transportation guidance, really focused on how to enable and how to leverage that access to metro rail, the multimodal connections in terms of pedestrian connectivity, biking connectivity, and also, well, accommodating automobiles, it not being the sole focus of the transportation element. Looking at transportation demand management and how do we make the roadway experience a more amenable and a more friendly experience for the roads. And then looking at our as I mentioned, taking the parking, making it into more of a structured form, and then along the streetscapes as well. The urban design is really designed to be one that's more of an urban character, looking at the orientation of buildings and the connectivity between them, really varying the building heights in order to have those kind of that visual appeal of an urban form. You don't want to have everything all the same height because it's just not something that is considered the best practice when it comes to urban design. Looking at gateway features in the periphery of the core area and really examining how folks access the core area from outside. Looking at transitions to neighboring uses, and by this I mean where we've got a transition zone between the core area and the surrounding non-core areas, how we handle those in terms of impacts and in terms of the visual and the impacts that we may see from a more intense development onto a lesser intense non-core area. The integration of urban parks and how those function as part of as part of a key element of the urban design, and then looking at streetscape and how we can really activate the streets, make them pedestrian friendly, make them places that people are willing to stop and enjoy, whether that's a cup of coffee on the street or to sit on a bench and read a book, or just to provide for that walking experience. And we also have some environmental goals here, primarily in terms of green building for the existing and new buildings. And I should mention that all of these are we have a number of other guiding elements that we follow in terms of our area-wide guidance and our county-wide policies. When we talk about an environment, we're not just looking at green building, for example. We're looking at tree cover, we're looking at stormwater management, we're looking at noise, we're looking at all of the environmental elements that we would already look at in terms of development. But here in the core area, we have a specific guidance to look at the green building provisions. So I'm going to go ahead and pause. Are there any questions here from the task force members about the overall vision before we get into the next section?
Hey, Ryan.
I don't have anything at the moment, Ryan.
Okay, thanks, Jimmy. And I
So,
heard
hey-
someone else there.
Sorry, Ryan. It's Sam. I'll raise my hand next time. I apologize.
Oh, no worries.
Hey, no, one question I had said, I mean, great slide before, and all those things are beautiful. I didn't see one thing in between transportation or urban design about bicycle access. Is that been considered?
Yeah, absolutely. And I didn't mention that specifically in here, but we'd consider that part of the multimodal connections. So when we think multimodal, we're thinking not necessarily cars, not necessarily just pedestrians, but all forms of access. And so looking at bikes, looking at the areas where we currently have trail access, and I'll get into that a little bit later in the presentation, but we're looking at, pedestrian connections, bike connections, and to, also car connections, because those are necessary as well. But no, that's a really good point. It's not something that I left out here, only that it's kind of rolled up into those multimodal connections.
Awesome. Yeah. I mean, there's especially that location with the new 66 bike trail and all the ICC and all the other stuff, man. That's a really good roads for both those big trails. So that appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. And you'll see that 66 trail is going to play a role here in just a few slides, but we'll show you how we're looking at that currently. So
appreciate it, brother.
Do we have any other questions or comments before we move on?
Yes, I do. This is
Hi, Mary.
Mary. Lower my hand. So on the urban design, the urban parks and the streetscape, I see that you have those included. It would be great to have a bullet on placemaking,
Yeah.
which is a focus of the county, because it really helps to define what it is you're trying to do on different streets. And to that end, for example, retail, ground floor retail, there may not be a market for ground floor retail in every core area property. And so really defining where are the streets where you could have retail and you could have, that sort of placemaking. And then maybe there's one street back where you have multifamily that's much more of a meandering, pathway or some type of a linear park, but it's not necessarily retail activated. So defining sort of where these commercial areas and placemaking, I think that is one area I'd like to see that you think about, and you probably are.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That makes
out.
a lot of sense. Yeah, definitely placemaking is a key part of this, of course. And anytime that we're looking at making a more urbanized area, even if it's a suburban area, we want to have, that's a key goal of our Board of Supervisors, is to have those placemaking elements. So that's definitely part of this. And at the time that the vision statements like this were developed back in 2016, the ground floor retail was really something that was called out as important at that time. But if that's something that we need to take a closer look at, as part of this process, we can certainly do that. Obviously, the retail market has changed, and we want to be responsive to that. So,
but we still want to be
very good
able
point.
to have the ability to walk to retail. And so when we think about transit within a certain walk shed, we should also be thinking about retail within a certain walk shed. And if you want to just see a very good example of this, and not that I'm comparing Fairfax Corner in any way to Vancouver in Canada, but they have streets that have the retail on it, and that's where the main bus lines go. And then one street back is more residential, and they have more of the, as I said, park type elements. And you could go several blocks that way. And then the next block after that would be a commercial area. And so the mixed use retail is sort of more congregated, which in a way helps with the whole placemaking. and you don't have a lot of vacant retail, that detracts from, I think, the livability of some multifamily buildings.
No, that's a great point. I think that we can definitely take a look at that, in greater detail. I've read a little bit about the the urban design of Vancouver. I've not been there myself, but definitely I think that there's a lot of different examples that we can pull from, and so thank you. That's a really good point.
Thanks.
Okay, so if there are no other questions, we'll go ahead and move on to the next section here, which is our community poll. So we conducted an online poll from June 24th to July 26th. We did this via the public input platform. This is a platform that allows for online surveys and online polls where you have people logging in, providing responses to questions, but also free-form comments. And so it's a really great way to engage the community and provide a way that that folks are able to provide their feedback without having to come to a public meeting or show up at 7:00 p.m. on a weeknight when they've got jobs and childcare and things like that other things that they've got to work with. And so this is something that we've been experimenting with as a county for the last few years now, but we wanted to make sure that we included this as part of this project as well. So let's get into some of these results that we've had so far. So our poll ran from, as I mentioned, June 24th to July 16th. I'm sorry, that should actually be July 26th. That's a typo on my part. But we received over 2,000 views of the page. Of them, we had 587 people respond to the poll. That resulted in over 3,000 unique answers. By this, we mean like multiple choice responses, and also over 1,000 unique free-form, text-based comments that people provided as well. And so what we've done is we've taken these questions, we've done some analysis on them, and we've kind of combined these responses into a series of categories for easy digestion. But certainly we're not discounting individual comments. There's some great content in there and some great ideas for the area. But just to give you a sense of how people responded, one of the things we asked first of all was, how are respondents using the core area? And you can see that, of the people that answered this question, 544 people, we allowed multiple selections. And so people can select, more than one category here. But you see that the responses is that, most people are coming to the core area for shopping, dining, personal activities. Certainly not a surprise given the types of options and of restaurants and retail and, entertainment that's available in the core area. But this is kind of, validating that this is a destination area where people are visiting for the amenities. We see that some people, 22%, come to the government center and conduct county business. We've got 19% employees who work in the core area. And then at lower rates, we have folks who either live in the core area, either owning or renting. And then down at the bottom, we have this business or property owners at 1%, which on its face seems low, but in fact, it's that wasn't surprising at all because this poll really was not intended for the business and property owners. It was more for the visitors of the area and the residents. We've done separate outreach with the business and property owners, and so we'll explain that in some detail in some of the results we found there. But again, this. That's not indicative of a low turnout from the business and property owner community, just that we were doing other outreach on this. The next question we asked was, what are your most frequent activities, and kind of how people are enjoying the amenities of the core area. You see here very similarly, we've got shopping, dining, and entertainment. Many people use the walking trails for exercise and recreation. That scored high as well. Employment is about 15%. Those are those employees I mentioned. And then similarly, conducting government business. A number of people come to the government center for voting. And then also ranking high here was with 8.6%. I was rather surprised to see a lot of people coming and doing the trash and recycling disposal. That's at the I-66 transfer station that's actually just outside of the core area. But nonetheless, it did rank, higher than what we expected to see. So you can see here we've got some public transit, some doctor's appointments and things like that, and children's activities. But again, these are all based off of free-form comments where people were allowed to input text and really provide succinct and a diversity of answers here. So that was 197 comments on this one. And then we asked, what do you want to see more of in the core area? How can we make the core area a better place? You can see here that the top ranking answer was by having more green space and natural areas within the core area. Not necessarily surprising, because we already know that, with the exception of the government center campus, we don't have a lot of open space. We don't have a lot of green and natural areas in the core area, but that's certainly something that's valued by the community. We also see trails, pedestrian, and bike improvements. And so, that goes back to, the vision for the core area being a more connected and pedestrian and bike-friendly place. And so we see a need for that. We see a need, 13.4% of folks wanted more parks and recreation, which, makes sense when you consider that parks and recreation, we don't have a lot of amenities for active recreation here in the core area. And then a need for civic spaces. Mixed use development in the core area ranked in there as well. And you can kind of see some of the other options where, people have requested things like, more housing, more green building, public transit, so on and so forth. Surprisingly, we had 5% of the people actually mentioned specifically a pedestrian walkway over I-66 connecting Fairfax Corner with the Fair Oaks Mall, which was surprising to see just that level of specificity. But certainly, some people do want that from the survey. And next, we, as part of the survey, we shifted focus also to talk about the government center campus in particular. With the government center visioning portion of this, we wanted to really dial in and see specifically how the government center campus was being used and how we can improve the conditions and the experience there. But you can see many people, 32% conduct business with the county, which is why they go there. Others, primarily residents, are using the trails and the open space. Some folks live near the government center, and then others, 14%, are the government center workers who work for the county. And we have other is just other activities where maybe they're not conducting business or doing trails or working at the government center, but maybe they have other activities such as attending, concerts or farmers markets or other types of activities that didn't necessarily fall into one of the other categories. And then we did get one response for someone living at the residences at government center. It says 0 there, but it's actually just slightly over that since we did get one response. Now, what do respondents like most about the government center campus? By and large, people do like the convenient location and the ease of access of getting to the government center. The green space is highly valued. As again, I mentioned, that was one of the it's one of the only areas of natural green space available in the core area currently, and so that is something that the community does make use of and enjoys. We also see events and programming. You'll recall that the government center has events such as concerts, farmers markets. We've done the Fairfax Fair in the past, and so kind of those community civic events. And then, somewhat surprisingly, was the library, which is located in the main government center building. A number of people said that they really appreciated having that library there. And so there may be some opportunities to expand that type of a use when we get into actual uses at the government center. And then, in addition to how people like these activities, we asked them to rank how important are these activities to them. And you can see here on the side, by and large, it follows the same, kind of response rate, but location and green space ranked very highly, followed by events and programming, library, and then the other activities as well. And then similarly, we asked what could make the government center campus better. Kind of mirroring what we know about the recreational situation in the area. People want to see more active and passive recreation. They want more commercial and retail options. We got a lot of comments on a greater diversity of businesses or greater diversity of restaurants, of ways that people can go shopping and entertain themselves. They wanted to see greater connections to nearby communities and activities. Again, speaking to that need for that multimodal connectivity and connecting the government center to their surrounding area. Many people wanted to see more public facilities, whether that was libraries or homeless shelters or other community services that the county provides. Some wanted to see more housing options as well. That ranked rather high in terms of potential uses at the government center campus. And then we expanded on this question. We also asked for free-form comments on this. Now this graph is a little bit different in that we have in blue the actual free-form comments that we received, but then much like social media, folks are able to respond that they like a particular comment, and so we wanted to catalog those as well in terms of looking at the engagement on individual comments. But you can see mixed-use development at the government center ranked very high. As did the need for public recreation and parks. Those were the top two. But folks also really value gathering places and programming. Those community activities, the concerts, the farmers markets, things of that nature. Green space was valued as well. You can see that here. We got a large number of comments, 22, but then a number of people like this in terms of bringing back the fair and the Celebrate Fairfax that took place for many years. But also you see some comments on some differing opinions. Some folks want more housing on campus. Some want no more housing on campus. And so, the comments really reflect the wide range of things that people want and do not want. But again, we also look at the connections of walking, biking, environmental features, public transit, so on and so forth. So that gives us a good idea here of not only how the government center campus is being used, but what can make the place better and what people really value in terms of what the government center offers. And then, we pretty much already knew the answer to this question going in here, but we did want to ask this just in terms of, judging the effectiveness of how people access the government center. You see here, the vast majority of people are driving versus walking or other, but, that's also indicative of the historic design of the government center campus. It was designed to be a, auto-centric place versus pedestrian or bike oriented. And so, we do have some work here to do, but, it does show that indeed more people are driving to the campus than not. And then the second part of I mentioned earlier, the second part of our outreach was outside of the poll was contacting individual property owners and developers in terms of not only finding out, does the current adopted comprehensive plan guidance meet their needs for their properties and what they would want to see for development, but also if it doesn't, what might they propose for some suggested improvements or, let's say, increased intensities or uses. We've heard from 3 large landowners so far. We've heard from the Fairfax Mall. Now, I should say none of these represent a change in use of the property, but they are requesting a higher intensity than what is currently planned. And we'll get into this later on in the presentation. We'll talk about the intensities and what all of that means. But, Fairfax Mall is requesting an increase. The Fairfax Corner is requesting an increase, also still mixed use. And then there was a Fairfax Corner. You'll recall that this was initially a site-specific plan amendment to redevelop 2 of the multifamily buildings. They've come back and they've requested that the multifamily, the entire development be considered for an increase in FAR as well. And we've just, by and large, we've just received some of these requests, and so we'll be analyzing these as we go forward, and we'll come back with our analysis and our suggestions on this at a later meeting. But I did want to just make you aware of the activity that we've seen so far in the area. All right, I've been talking a lot. I'm going to pause here for some additional questions, comments, concerns from the task force. Does anyone have questions? If not, we can go ahead and continue. Okay, great. So the next thing we wanted to provide an update on is the government center visioning. This is a sub-project of phase 3. We've been working very closely with our county leadership committee comprised of senior leadership that's responsible for the daily operations of the government center. We've done the public outreach that you've seen, and we've been working very closely with our consultant on this, who's Torty Gallus. They're a planning and architecture firm, and they've put together a series of analyses and potential options for the government center that we can cover here. So you'll recall in our last meeting we talked about the scope here. But primarily, we're looking at ways in which we can repurpose the surface parking lot of the government center, looking at how we better enhance the delivery of services that the government center provides, not only locally to the local residents, but also countywide services in line with our countywide strategic plan, our One Fairfax policy, and our other policies that have come to pass since the campus was initially developed back in the 1980s. We've got a planned affordable housing development that will be beginning construction rather soon. We're looking at the need to protect the natural resources here on site, and also looking at, again, key thing here is the connectivity, transit, and walkability given the government center's location within the core area. So this is a slide that was put together by Torty Gallus, our consultants, and we had asked them to take a look at the context of the government center within the surrounding area. What this map here shows is, surprisingly, it actually does cover the core area, but you can see here that they've categorized where the different types of land uses are by color. We've got that red where you can see up there at Fair Oaks Mall, that's commercial. We've got some mixed use there at Fairfax Corner. You've got medium density and low density residentials, those sort of beige and yellow colors. And then our public facilities in blue. We've got an industrial use right there off of West Ox Road. And then open area and tree cover are delineated as well. So this provides, and you can see here we've got the location of trails, location of on-street bike facilities, and some indicators of how the intersections around the immediate vicinity of the government center are configured. The idea here showing kind of these are the current conditions, so to speak, the existing conditions of where we're starting from when it comes to additional uses at the government center. I'm going to advance the slides here. You can see here's another slide showing the availability of our public transit and our bus routes. You can see a number of these bus routes go into that new transit station that we have directly across the street there. You can see where the location of the potential metro station is in relation to that along the I-66 corridor. But overall, we see that the area is relatively well served by bus transit currently, and certainly that would improve when metro ultimately arrives. And there may be some additional options as well along I-66 for things like bus rapid transit or other types of public transit that have yet to become online. But this analysis just shows the public transit connectivity in the area. And then so this map is rather similar to the first, but this was the consultant's first kind of the first take, or the rough draft, so to speak, of opportunities for greater connectivity in the area around the government center. So you can see here some ideas. Certainly, nothing has been decided. Of course, these are just merely ideas worth considering. Where such as looking at a connection between Fairfax Corner and Fair Oaks Mall, across I-66, that came up in the public comments as well, and I know that it's been something that's been talked about over many years in terms of the metro arriving. and kind of what that connectivity might look like. Looking at enhancing the intersections to make them more pedestrian friendly. Looking at how kind of creating this a street grid that facilitates better transit as well as provides for more pedestrian connectivity and bikeable connectivity. Looking at connecting, providing for, you can see here in the trail network, some of these dotted sections that have not yet been completed, that are planned but have yet to be constructed, and filling in those gaps. And then also looking at some options for things around, for example, there's a historic Manassas Gap rail bed along the southwestern portion of the government center property, and how to really capitalize on that as a cultural resource. And so, just some ideas, but it kind of gives you a sense of, from a connectivity perspective, what the current area looks like and where there may be some opportunities for improvement. Following the existing conditions analysis, the consultant put forward this list of kind of things that might be considered for a future government center. What they did was they did a very extensive review of other government centers in the nation, kind of in different contexts, whether they're more rural or more suburban, or in some cases more urban, and kind of in terms of best practices, what makes for a successful government center. And so you can kind of see here some ideas for new types of uses that could be introduced. Again, certainly no decisions have been made at all. These are just ideas put forward for consideration based on what we know of other government centers and what they're providing to their residents. But you can see the kind of the wide range of activities, everything from pure government administration all the way into like a full, mixed use, where it might include retail and housing and things of that nature as well. And so as part of that analysis, in looking at other government centers, the consultant looked at different typologies, ranging from on the left here, a government center, which is would be described as typically having a purely a governmental use, much like we have today. And then on the other end of the spectrum, we would have like a government center alongside a mixed use development, where you would have a public and a private function to the site. You see these a lot in, for example, city and more urban environments. You might have more of a mixed use context. And then somewhere in the middle would be a government center, but more so a functioning as a civic center. And so you've got a lot of these quasi-public uses, such as maybe an educational satellite campus for the local community college, or for JMU or George Mason or someone like that. Museums, performance spaces, auditoriums. And you may have some police administration courts and things where we've consolidated government services, but also provide for those kind of quasi-public uses as well. And so taking this typology, they then kind of looked at different elements here, and you can see, I won't go through this whole list, but these are some of the elements. And so based on the types of scenarios that may be put forward, you can kind of get an idea of the trade-offs that are involved. Like, for example, having a higher density urban form of a government center may require a higher reliance on things like structured parking versus surface parking, for example. Or you may have, a higher density may allow you to have parks on site that are more of an urban park character versus more of a larger suburban park. But again, just examples, but just to give you an idea of the types of considerations. And you can see here what they've done is, looking at the existing government center, this is how they've ranked where we are today based on these various metrics. And so, for example, an overall low building density on site. We've got the open space character tends to be more visual and more natural than it does to be like usable active open space. active open space could be described as something like a, athletic field, for example, or something like that, where it's a use that is actively, for lack of a better term, actively used. You can see that we have much more of a reliance on the surface parking than we do on the structured parking. Of course, we've got structured parking at the government center as well as at the Harity, Panino, and public safety buildings. But by and large, we're relying on surface parking. And so you get a sense here of kind of where the government center falls in terms of these various metrics. Now, taking this concept, one step further, we've got our three typologies of what the government center could be. Again, kind of a fully consolidated government center, and then a mixed-use center there on the right-hand side. But then looking at kind of what level of building intensity might be appropriate for the area, whether it's low, medium, or high. And so from that, we have a series of kind of options. And I can go through some of these here on the next slide, but in terms of what the consultant, their kind of reaction to this and what they recommended is that here in red, they kind of view these types of scenarios as kind of the more appropriate ones given our context here in Fairfax. And so they've kind of focused on looking at enhancing the government center the way it is today, but perhaps bringing some additional intensity on site and start to house some of the agencies that are currently located off-site and bringing them into a consolidated area. The Civic Center could take one of two forms. They're looking at more of a higher intensity type where you've got a combination of cultural and educational and government activities. And then the other option that they looked at was a kind of a fairgrounds active recreation with a large amount of open space that would be able to accommodate some of those larger events. And then if we were to go for really the kind of the mixed use idea of both a public and a private types of development, looking at kind of a transit neighborhood infill district, the high density transit oriented option up at top would be more appropriate if we had metro in the area, and that was something that we wanted the Fairfax Center to develop in the same way that, for example, maybe Reston or some of those more intense areas of the county have developed. But in terms of a middle ground before metro arrives, they would be looking at something that's more of an infill district that they described. And so kind of you get a sense here of what each of these options looks like. And I should say that, of course, this is still very early on in terms of analysis and in terms of decision making. But these types of options were put forward to the leadership committee to in a way kind of vet the work of the consultant. But then now the consultant is going to go back and analyze each of these options in detail. And then once we have something that we have that analysis done, we can then take that out to the community, get their reaction, and get a sense of what folks are really wanting to see from the government center, given the options that are available. And so, I don't want to suggest in any way that any of these are, decisions that have been made, but this is just the very starting point of starting to look at what might be possible here. And I'll go ahead and pause. Are there any questions from the task force? Hi, Mary.
Hi, Ryan. I'm glad to hear that you're going to go out to the community, because it is the local community, both Braddock districts and Springfield, but also the entire county, because the government center belongs to everybody. And I really, when you were telling me that the senior leadership is deciding these certain categories, that didn't really resonate with me, because they certainly have a role to play and they work there, but this is really for the community to have a say in as well. And I think when the original government center was built, there was a lot of backlash about what was built. So hopefully we can learn from that and really involve the community. But I like the way it was laid out to consider different options. And I was a little disappointed that the cultural part wasn't more of a focus, that the leadership thought that it would be better to bring more government building, functions into the government center versus the cultural component.
Yeah, no, definitely about the public engagement. That's a very fair point, and I do want to stress that has been from the very beginning a very key part of this. One thing that it looks like if you look at the dates of that poll, it looks like these options were sort of put together in haste after the poll was completed, but actually the consultant helped to develop those questions and was actively monitoring the poll results as they were coming in. And so much of those scenarios were a direct response to many of the comments that we received in the poll about how the government center was used, how different activities people wanted to see. And so, they're taking that information back now, going to put that and kind of synthesize a lot of that, and then we're going to take those scenarios, back out into the community later on, probably this fall is what we're envisioning. But I definitely think that I've been very pleased with the way that the consultant has been responsive to the public comments that we received. In terms of the actual involvement of the leadership team, really that team was put forward primarily to help us as staff and as the consultants, really to distill how the county is enacting and implementing its strategic plan. And so that was the impetus behind having this smaller group of internal folks, just because anytime you've got a strategic plan, there's going to have to be priorities of how that's implemented. And so we wanted that insight from the senior leadership, because they can really provide that level of that level of understanding from that level that maybe our consultant or maybe us here at the staff level don't have.
And I do think that the staff need to think about how they're delivering services, because at the Planning Commission, I know when we went through the public facilities update, there was a lot of discussion about the need to go out into the districts and provide more services closer to where people live in a satellite model, and slimming down at the government center. But then they rent places all over. And so I don't feel that there's a clear understanding of how the county is positioning itself to deliver services. They kind of waffle back and forth. Lease space, the CIP starts to balloon when they want to build everything. That drives up taxes. I think there's a lot of things to think about. And it's not just the government center, it's that entire capital improvement program and delivery of services. And the strategic plan doesn't really answer that question. So if we use all of this government center real estate and then change our mind about the service delivery model, it's kind of hard to change. So I think there's lots of competing issues here.
Yeah. No, I that's a very, very good point, Mary. And just to help us navigate that a little bit better. And I wish I had an answer for you tonight, but I just don't. But to help us navigate that, we've really made sure in that committee to involve representation from the county executive's office, who can kind of look at this in terms of a holistic way of looking at how the county delivers services and its programs. We still have a lot of unanswered questions. To your point about whether we consolidate on campus or whether we do more of a local community district-based or I should say like a distributed model. That's still kind of an things that we're not completely clear on, to be honest, but things that we're working through as part of this process. The other thing to consider is given the changing patterns of our workforce, and now we have more people working from home, what are our space needs at the government center itself? Is there an opportunity to bring some of our leased properties onto site? And folks over at our facilities management are doing that type of space planning and that study. In fact, I've got a meeting next week to talk with them about that and kind of get some better understanding of where they are in that process. But these are kind of the big questions that we're looking at here in terms of because it's not just a land use study in a way. It's more of a clarification of how the county wants to proceed on a strategic level of how it's best serving the community ultimately.
Yeah, and then as well the cost, because the South County Government Center is a very large building. It requires staffing. So there are implications to the budget of some of these decisions.
No, absolutely.
Okay, thanks. Oh, and one other thing, it would be to the overall image that was shown that the consultant provided. I don't know if we can go back to that, but the blocks look really large.
You're looking at, are you looking at the map here, these?
Yeah, so if you look at Fairfax Corner and you see the size of those blocks, and we all know sort of what makes Fairfax Corner work, and how you can navigate it and get in around. Those are small blocks.
Yeah.
And what you're showing for Fair Oaks Mall are very large blocks. Those are really large.
I will say that the Fair Oaks Mall is just a completely made up idea. It really has no bearing whatsoever on kind of what's been proposed for that area in the past. It was just kind of a way of saying that there would ultimately be some sort of mixed use type of street grid, that sort of thing, but it's not in any way anything that would be reality. It was just.
I'll add to that a little bit. We're going to show in a couple slides more a 3D rendering of what basically of a plan that was submitted a couple of years ago that shows a much more compact kind of urban form in a redevelopment scenario for Fair Oaks Mall. So totally agree with the comment, and I think we've got something a little bit more sophisticated that will show just a little bit.
Well, and if they still have time to make adjustments to this, they should probably put some skinny lines in between those giant blocks, because that just wouldn't really advance what I think the comp plan says about that area.
There's time. We can.
It doesn't represent what's already in the plan, right? On the comp plan in terms of the text.
No, nothing about the graphic has any bearing on what's already in the plan.
We can work with them on the graphic.
I think you should not put things on a map that don't represent the text that's already in there, or unless it's being proposed to be this. So I find that was a problematic area of the map. And then just one last comment to think about is that when you have trails, which we want trails. If you have too many trail connections, all you have done is fragment your forested area, because every trail takes about 25 feet of trees out. And so if you have a trail running through, and I'm looking at the bottom right by 29, if one of those trail connections can be made in an area that isn't going through the middle of the forest, every time you do that, that is preserving your forest. So showing too many connections, like every single neighborhood does not need that connection, but you can find connections in the neighborhood that then lead to the trail. And that's just always a danger that I see when I look at these maps and then they find their way into the comp plan. is that pretty soon you don't have a forest left.
Mm-hmm. No, that's a really good point, and you know, we'll definitely pass that along to the consultant in terms of, you know, the way that they've depicted a lot of these connections in the graphic. But certainly we are, you know, aware of the need, and certainly we do want to preserve, you know, these natural areas. And that's kind of one of the key objectives of this whole exercise, is to do that. So,
but I like
that's
that
great
they've
point.
actually shown, you know, shown some ideas here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's really all this graphic was meant to do, was just kind of put forward some ideas. You know, whether or not they're feasible or not, we don't really know, but just kind of, this was more of a brainstorming than it was anything else.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Okay, thanks.
Yep. Great. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to my colleague, Mike Linsky. He's our senior land use planner on the project. And he's going to talk to you a bit about the core area development and some of the history there, and some of the current and planned conditions.
Thanks, Ryan. Do you want to go keep running the slideshow, I guess, or I could try
Yeah,
to
if you just want to tell me, like, next slide, that's fine, and I can run them for you.
Okay, yeah, I was just going to go over some, I made up some exhibits just to show you what the current plan is and what the existing conditions are in relation, and some aspects like that. So this is the core area we're talking about. So the core area as it's defined now consists of all the subunits with the A prefix and the B prefix. And so the dashed line is on the bottom right is the current core area boundary, but we're also, for the purposes of the study, we're considering the reserve at Fairfax Center. That was part of the authorization. And then just to sort of round that out and make it a little more simple, we're including all of the government center parcel, just to keep it simple. And then similar to the other exhibits we've already seen, there's the potential future metro station as it's shown on our plan, and the radiuses from that. I guess we can go to the next slide. And I guess, yeah, we've talked already a little bit about floor area ratio, FAR. That's sort of a unit of measurement we use a lot in planning, which probably many of you might be familiar with, but basically it's just a way to talk about building intensity on a site. So the idea is it's a comparison of the built gross square footage of buildings and compared to the lot size. So if you had 100% of a lot covered with a one-story building, that would be a 1 FAR. And then if you, as the image shows, you know, as you build upwards, the same amount FAR takes up less of a footprint. So it's just generally a way to compare levels of intensity across different properties, but it's highly dependent on the size of the area and the nature of the area you're talking about. So like this area was planned at sort of the subunit level, the planned subunit level, which are subunits are sort of the unit of the Fairfax Center plan. And so if you're talking about a FAR on that scale, it's one thing, but then when you get on a site-by-site basis, you know, that if it's a 1 FAR for a whole subunit, you know, that could be distributed in different ways, as we'll see on some of the following slides. So next slide. And also that gets into the sort of types of development. So older audio-oriented uses that require surface parking, they're usually down in the 0.25 to maybe 0.5 at the very highest FAR. And then in order to get up to, when we start talking about mixed use or needing structured parking, you kind of have to get up to the 1.0 FAR or a little higher to get to the level where you can really support structured parking. So some of these mixed use developments you see, especially the older ones where they have like the sort of 4-story, 3 or 4-story buildings, those are, you know, in that 1.2, or like the Mosaic District's 1.2 overall, I think, but there's different portions of it that appear higher than that. But and then when you get into the metro levels of development right around metro stations, like in Reston area, where you might get up into the 3 FAR range, then even higher probably in Tyson's. So that gives you some idea of the range. But anything below, there's sort of a little jump between 0.25 or 0.5, maybe at the high end of the sort of audio-oriented development, and then like the 1.0, there's not a whole lot in between there, because you run out of surface parking at a certain level, and then you need to bump up to the next sort of intensity level to be able to support the structured parking. But anyway, next slide. Yeah, right now our core area, I guess uses range from, it's for the most part, the core area is planned around a 1.0 FAR level. And that's kind of goes back to our original transit planning way back when, you know, I guess 30 years ago, whenever this first started planning for transit areas, 1.0 was kind of like the default. And since then, as we'll see in another slide, planning's gotten more intense around transit areas, but that was sort of the urban mixed use level of intensity at one point in time. The 0.24, really about the only thing in that range now is there's like the promenade at Fairfax, whatever it's called, the Fairfax Promenade, which is the shopping center with Nordstrom's and Barnes and Noble. That's around that intensity. And the mall's right now at about a 0.4, I think, or something like that overall. So gives you some idea. Next slide. And let's see, so these are other suburban centers. So the Fairfax Center Area is a suburban center. So the other ones, these are sort of the maximum intensities that were gathered for those. So the Dulles, that has an actual transit station, so that's high, a little higher, 2 to 3 FAR. Centerville is much lower at right now, below a 1.0 FAR. And Lorton's also low, but there's a plan underway, a planning study to look at some higher intensities in that area. And Merrifield's a good kind of example because right at the transit station area, you're up at, you know, a little over 2 FAR, but then the Mosaic is like 1.2 range. So that gives you some comparison of the different typologies. Next slide. And then since this is a future, destined to be a future transit station area, hopefully at some point in time, these are some comparisons of how our TSAs in the different parts of the county are currently planned. So we're pretty consistent at looking as far as in the half-mile radius. There's a lot of, you know, 1.5 FAR range in that sort of outer half mile. And then you get into the quarter-mile range, and it, you know, could be anywhere from 1.5 to 3, with a little higher in a couple of areas. But so like the newest ones that are sort of newly planned are the Reston ones, and they're pretty consistent with having about 1.5 FAR in the half mile and 2 to 3 range in the quarter mile, you know, with the town center north being slightly higher. But just to give you an idea, and that's not to say we're going to necessarily plan this area for that kind of intensity right now, but we might be thinking ahead however many years. It's probably like the plan's typically sort of a 20-year planning document, but in the case of this transit station area, it's probably unlikely that it'll come in the next 20 years, but we need to anticipate a little farther out as far as, for one thing, not precluding the development that will need to happen at some point to support the metro, and maybe being able to anticipate some of that development ahead of time. But so this is sort of thinking long range. Next slide. So here's the plan as it sits now, the core area recommendations. So each of these areas shown on here is like a plan recommendation, basically. So there's recommendations overlay, they call them overlay recommendations, are sort of the highest level for each subunit in the Fairfax Center area. And then there's additional option areas in some of the subunits. That's why you see some additional areas in there. And so originally the sort of core development for the core area was centered originally sort of on a monument, and it was sort of envisioned to be a little more of a mixed use, a little more office-based mixed use village along Monument. And the mall had just been built right when the original Fairfax Center Area plan was planned. So it was planned for 0.5 FAR to kind of reflect what was there at the time. Since then, so a lot of the original planning was for office mixed use, which are the blue areas. And so the Fairfax Center Area plan, which was in 1984, was developed right about the same time as our plan districts, the PDC and the PDH. The original ones were developed. So they kind of, these mixed use categories, office mixed use, sort of correlated with the PDC zoning regulations, which really envisions like about a 60% principal, like office or commercial use, and only about a third residential use. So it was meant to be a little more commercial or office heavy as an employment center. And over time, we'll see in the next slide probably that it's built out a little more residential. But the green areas on here are the areas, I call them commercial mixed use. There have been newer plans for Fairfax Town Center, and the mall was replanned just a couple of years ago, and Fairfax Corner. So they have somewhat newer planning than the original Fairfax Center Area plan. So they have a little more planning that encourages a little more mix of uses and retail and things like that. And so the mall and Fairfax Corner are both planned at 1.0 FAR level. And so that whole area west of the mall in blue, it's all about 1.0. Then it was meant to sort of taper off towards the residential to the west. And Fairfax Town Center is planned at just 0.8 FAR, which is slightly lower. And that's not all built out now, as we'll see. I guess you can go to the next slide and see what's actually built out on the ground. So these are the existing uses. So some of those areas, like you see all the different FARs west of the mall, that whole area was planned for office mixed use at 1.0 FAR, and there's a couple other options in there, and it has built out as a mix of uses. This is just sort of breaking it down site by site to kind of show how it was distributed. But if you average it all together, it's all sort of built per the plan. So this is just sort of how it ended up. It ended up a little more residential heavy than was originally anticipated, but these are the uses we have now. So pretty much the whole plan, all the plan intensity for the core area, for the most part, it's been built out other than the dashed areas. So like the mall still has intensity from it's not built yet, and the town center, Fairfax Corner still has some build out potential, and there's a little bit at the government center that's, most of that has been approved already for a residential building that's not quite built yet. And then all these other areas are pretty much built out per the plan. So if there was going to be any redevelopment there, they would have to redevelop at their current intensity, or else would have to have some additional intensity to consider redevelopment. And then, so the only areas that really, I guess we'll cover this in another slide too, that weren't ever really planned at the same level as everything else are the sort of mall out parcels. So the mall was planned for a 1.0 FAR, and those out parcels were never up planned along with the mall. So they're only planned, I guess that's the previous slide, they're only planned for 0.6 FAR. But anyway, so let's go to the next slide, and I can answer questions about this. Is a comparison of the previous two slides. So we got the adopted plan on the left and sort of how it's built out to date on the right. And then, okay, you can go to the next slide. So this is just this is a 3D picture of what's there now, existing development. This is off our county GIS system. And ignore the pink government center. I'm not sure why it shows up as pink, but for some reason it does. But so that's existing development. And then the next slide will show, so these are all based on concepts that we received during these various plan amendments for these different parcels and things that show how these areas could build out the remaining unbuilt. So this is the remaining unbuilt potential that's in the plan now. So like the mall's got 2.9 million square feet of potential. And this is sort of the concept they gave us a couple of years ago. And that's not to say that it would build out like this specific concept is not in the plan itself. This is just sort of an example they gave us of how it might build out. It could be totally different than that, but this just gives you an idea of what that level of intensity would look like in just one concept. So the concept for that anyway was to maintain the core part of the mall as the mall, and then as the sort of anchor tenants might, you know, because the concern at the time was these anchor tenants, would they be viable if they go out of business? Are they going to be viable spaces to fill? And they've found other uses to come in and occupy them in a lot of cases. So they may not necessarily go away, but if they did go away, there would be potential to redevelop some of the surface parking areas with more of a mix of uses. So that's the idea there. And Fairfax Corner have a rezoning entitlement for their whole 1.0 FAR, but it's not all built out at this point. It's only like at 0.6 or something. So there's still potential there to build out more. And those buildings are sort of based on some of their approvals, but like I said, they may or may not build out exactly that way. And the same with the Fairfax Town Center. I think that concept was predicated on the Safeway sort of staying there. I think they have long-term leases on some of those buildings, and like the cinema and some of those other retail uses would remain, and then some of the other uses could redevelop with a little more residential. So I think even, I think any of these, even the mall concept, it's only showing about, I believe, something like 40% residential. So these are still pretty commercial heavy developments. And then you can see the residences at the government center. That's the approved building that's going through the process now through site planning, and that's expected to be built. So that's basically a snapshot of what the build out of the current plan could look like, or that's the level of intensity that's already approved. So if that makes sense. And let's see, what's the next slide, Ryan? Okay, so yeah, this is trying to show sort of the I don't know if you call them opportunity areas, but the dashed areas like those mall out parcels I talked about in the Fairfax Promenade. I think those were properties that were identified back in 2016 or whenever it was, where the phase 2 task force was coming up with the core area vision and all that. And we're anticipating these were the properties that are sort of kind of under plan, I guess, compared to the rest of the area. I don't have the same level of plan intensity. So those are the areas that could be looked at, and they're older, like the mall out parcels. They may be perfectly viable uses for a long time, or they may not be. They're kind of older developments. So those are areas that should be probably looked at, and just to ensure that they have the opportunity to develop up at the same level as the mall, because the mall came in for, a more recent rezoning and was sort of a plan to allow more of a mix of uses. And those out parcels right now are not allowed to do residential under their current planning. It's just purely commercial or office. So we probably need to look at those and bring them up to the same level as the mall planning. In the promenade, that could be questionable. It's at a much lower intensity than a lot of the other development around, but then those are important uses to have, in a community. So that could be and that's also up to property owners and the desires of the community, whether those uses are, desirable enough to maintain, or there is potential opportunity to redevelop those kinds of sites. But whether or not that needs to happen is up for discussion. And then I guess the other 3 parcels marked are the ones which we have some interest from the property owners that have submitted ideas for this study. So, and this list of sites could be expanded or is up for discussion. It's just sort of the low-hanging fruit of where to start, considering looking at for additional plan guidance. But what else do we have here? What's the next slide? Do we have more slides, Brian?
No, Mike, this is the last slide, but
so I guess we could open it up for questions if folks have questions on these slides.
Yes, thanks, Mike. That was great. Let me see.
And we have a lot more detailed analysis and all this kind of stuff. This is high level, so we'll get into. We could zoom into certain areas and look at much more detail into these kinds of things in the future. But.
Yeah, much of this portion of the presentation is more so to set the stage so that when we talk about the specific development options, we have a sense of what the core area is already planned for and what's already been developed and where the potentials are.
And maybe what I could do real quick to just kind of set the stage for the task force members. So we've included, we've given you a lot of information, obviously, but yeah. We've started to summarize what we see as kind of some of the key opportunities for the core area, and they're listed here in the bullets. What we're hoping to do is with the ideas that are noted here in these callouts, as well as the areas that Mike has outlined in with those dashed lines, is to start to think holistically about a potential land use program that we would then test and run through an impact analysis. And so what we're really kind of hoping to get, from the task force is kind of a sense of, are we heading in the right direction? Generally speaking, in terms of these kind of opportunities for pursuing with the study, are there things that we should consider? Are there things that we, that are challenging, and that you prefer that we didn't? But we're kind of really hoping for that gut check so that we have some, level of confidence that we're embarking in the right direction for our impact analysis and for a future scenario or a couple of scenarios to test. So hopefully that'll give you enough kind of insight into why we're kind of identifying these things, because we're really hoping for some feedback.
See, Mary's got her hand up. Hi, Mary.
Sorry, I don't want to be the only one weighing in here, but when I look at those remnant corners of Fair Oaks Mall, that's bounded by Route 50 and I-66, both of which are car tunnels. I mean, they're corridors, they're impenetrable for the most part. And as one person, or you might have said earlier that it came up about pedestrian crossing. I mean, that's pretty important. But the other thing too is from a livability standpoint, putting housing in those types of places, I find is kind of problematic from a quality of life issue, the noise, view. I just have a concern about that, if that's one of the things you're thinking of. There is going to be some supportive housing that was approved by the board on the other side of Route 50, near that box where it says Fair Oaks Mall in that left corner. And it's essentially in a cloverleaf between Route 50 and West Ox Road. And it's going to be shoehorned in there. And, you know, I think the county can make it work, but it's really not the most desirable places to put people who will have to try to cross roads to get to things. So what were you thinking about with those sort of corner properties? Like right now, in the far right of the Fair Oaks Mall, there's some hotels. That seems like a decent use of the space. What did you have in mind for those areas?
I could chime in a little because I've looked at these sort of areas, and I mean that's one question for the task force is, I mean the point here is, well, the last task force recommended to look at these because at the time the mall hadn't come in for its plan amendment yet, so that whole area was never even planned with the original Fairfax Center Area plan. It had just been built, so it was sort of the plan was just written to reflect what was there. So I think there was just a realization that these uses are getting old and they need to be looked at whether. So I think one question is what, you know, at what point are uses, do they need to be redeveloped like a hotel use or something seems like a good use there? There's obviously older office buildings from the 80s, which, you know, are probably getting long in the tooth, or who knows, like, so that's sort of an open question. And some of these other areas that have office building, does every office building in the county now that's gets to a certain age need to be considered for some kind of redevelopment option or not? Or like, and then what other uses are there other than residential nowadays to develop? I mean, residential is an easy one in a lot of places, but like I said, in certain areas, it's not necessarily where you want to put residential. So what is there nowadays to, so all those we weren't really thinking of a particular thing for those sites. It's just, I think you just need to consider sort of what's there, the age of the buildings. Is there gonna need to be some redevelopment opportunity there or not? Or are they good for the next 20 years? Or, and some of that could use input from the property owners, I guess. And if they were to redevelop, like what kinds of uses would be, you know, feasible even or desirable, and like, would that require any change in the plan or not? Or maybe it wouldn't, maybe it would, those kind of questions. So, and the same with like I said, there's those office uses scattered in with the residential. They're fine as they are, but if they at some point become where they're, you know, not marketable or something, what other uses would be, you know, acceptable, or what would it take to even redevelop a use like that? Do you need a higher level of intensity to be able to make it feasible? And so those kinds of questions. So I don't know if that answered your question, but
no, I think it's I
those
think
are all
you're right.
considerations.
I mean,
Those are areas that just
are
haven't been replanned.
But let's take it through the process. If somebody came in for a redevelopment and said, hey, I want to put residential here, then the first thing we would do is look at some of our comprehensive plan guidance for the area, but also in the policy plan. And it would say things like that the noise level can't be above 45 decibels inside their home. And if you have a multifamily building, for example, you have to provide recreation opportunities, and you can't put those right up against the highway. You know, because there's just the sound, you can't mitigate it. So I think that we have to kind of look at the policy that we have as well to see whether those are appropriate locations. And maybe in some areas it would be okay, depending on how the rest of that mall redevelops. But I would just be concerned, 66 at Route 50, that's a really tough area, I would think. I don't know if there's any other reaction, but
so I mean, the idea is, I guess, is just to sort of think about these things now rather than just wait for site-specific plan amendments to come in for these properties, and just try to think of it at this point and cohesively plan those kinds of considerations, and if possible, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, tree canopy, I can tell you that whole area is bereft of tree canopy, and any redevelopment of the mall, I believe, is going to have to put in some heavy tree canopy. That's already part of their plan, I believe, or, the comprehensive plan. But there's no real environmental preservation. And this area is right at the headwaters of Difficult Run if you go across the road to the north. And that clover leaf of Route 50 and 66, there's like a stormwater pond and a stream that goes through it. And all that pollution goes off to 4 different streams. So you're really talking about restoration. There's no environmental resources left. But this is thought-provoking, and I really don't have any solution or idea. I'm curious if any other task force members have any thoughts. Then I'll bow out.
Mary, real quick this is Ryan, but real quick on your comment, I went back to look at the task force from phase 2, the recommendations back in 2016, and it did look like at the time they were proposing some level of residential in those out parcel areas, but it was all under the caveat that it would need to be studied further for feasibility. They just ran some initial numbers, but it wasn't as though they'd put together any real detailed plan to have residential there. It was just considered as part of the wider context of if this were to be a mixed use parcel like the mall, kind of what types of uses could go here. But again, it wasn't anything in detail in terms of impact analysis.
Right, and how much property there is there to work with.
And you recall too that a lot of this analysis that was done back in phase 2, much of that was deferred until now because of the need to do the transportation study.
Well, I was going to say that, I mean, the mall came in for their own plan amendment a couple of years ago, and they didn't control those parcels, so they weren't included in the plan amendment. But really, is there any reason why they couldn't all be under the same recommendation or something? That's the kind of thing we could think about. I mean, they should be planned consistently, probably with the mall. And I mean, there's same concerns there with residential along Route 50 on the mall property too. There could be similar concerns. So that could be something that's just thought about in the context of the larger area as well. So that's the kind of thing we're thinking about. And along some lines, what you mentioned earlier a while back about like the ground floor retail being in strategic areas. And I think to me, those are the benefit. We'll end up doing various scenarios and things, I guess, development scenarios. But to me, like that's the purpose of doing scenario building. It's not to really develop a particular concept that you expect to get built as it's shown, because that never happens. But it's about you realize these kinds of considerations through the scenario process, what's important, and then you back out and create guidelines to guide, which there already is in this case, the core area guidance, which is a good starting point. But things like ground floor retail, where it might be appropriate, you can boil that down into the fundamentals and turn it into some kind of principles or guidelines or something that then whenever a real development proposal does come forward, you can use that guidance to inform, if that makes sense. But instead of trying to actually come up with a concept and which people do a lot of times, and then like think that this is our concept, but this never gets built the way that things change, and
Well,
so it's
you
really
do
more important
see-
to have a concise guidance for what are the important elements of this that we want to see.
Yeah, I mean, you do see that I-66 and Route 50 are major barriers, and that this area is really isolated pockets, currently. There's Government Center side that has a certain character with Fairfax Corner, et cetera. And then there's the other side of the mall, and trying to get between them, like even over to the promenade or these other areas, it's challenging. But anyway, good job on presenting the information.
Mm-hmm.
So how does this, in terms of these summary of opportunities, how does this task force address this question? Staff will come up with some ideas and
Yeah, we are currently continuing our outreach with the property owners and developers, and so you may see some additional concepts beyond what's been proposed for these three. But then we're also going to be looking at these other opportunity areas for what might be possible. And so what you'll see in the next meeting or in subsequent meetings is a more kind of detailed analysis of what we think may be possible in these areas. You'll recall we'll get the existing conditions on the transportation study coming up here in the next few months. That's going to tell us a lot about what the current network is able to support in terms of development. And so we'll use that, and we'll take a look at the ideas that have been put forward in terms of what those potential impacts might be. And we'll circulate those with our review agencies, do sort of a pre-staffing, as it were. But what we'll come back to you with is kind of our more informed ideas of what might be possible in these areas, given the analysis that we've done.
And if possible, if you can look at it from the perspective of the people who use the area. So in other words, if we're talking about the people who live here, like how far is it to walk to X? How far is it to walk or ride a bike? If we're talking multimodal, to the grocery store, to shopping, to the public, any kind of public civic spaces. I don't know if the transportation study is going to test that.
No, the transportation study is looking kind of at overall connectivity, and it's based on the existing network. That kind of gives us a sense of how much development, but it's more of an art to look at where the development should actually go in terms of what the walkshed looks like, and how far these types of uses might be, and where new uses such as a grocery store might be appropriate in order to ensure that walkability is part of the plan. So we'll definitely look at all of that. But ultimately, to Graham's point, the next step is not only looking at this from a design perspective, but developing that scenario for testing the transportation network for future conditions to see what we can support in the area without it being a full TOD style development. But so we've got kind of two different things going on. We've got the transportation issues, but then we've also got the design and the kind of livability aspects that you mentioned.
And then in terms of the overall vision for this Fairfax Center area, I think it was pretty clearly presented at the beginning that this is not envisioned to be a Tyson's. And I really appreciated the slide that showed the different densities for the different areas. And I was kind of surprised that Mosaic is only a 1.2, frankly.
Yeah,
but
that one's a little bit. I don't know if it's misleading or just. I guess it requires a little bit of explanation. Is that's based on the entire land unit, not the Mosaic district itself. And so you've got some lesser intense uses within the land unit, such as the post office and things. So overall, across the land unit, it's 1.2, but when you visit it, it seems like it may be a bit more.
Yeah,
I think it's pretty close to that because I worked on some of the rezoning stuff. And then you got to consider also you get like things like bonus residential intensities and things that can kind of make things, if you got a lot of residential, that can make it look more intense than what it does on paper. But
and so I guess the question here is sort of where does this fit in terms of that continuum of density between a Vienna type of a situation? Is it more Vienna's more villagey? I'm struggling a bit to try to see what kind of sweet spot works for this, and I think the community really has to weigh in on that too, because that's really the central question.
I could speak again, because I could think about it like that. I mean, that's something for the task force, I think, to talk just the goals for the study. Like, I mean, there's a certain level of some additional intensity that can still be built out. It can be a focus on placemaking, and then like I said, one question I have is just, are there certain uses that are going to need to be redeveloped in the next 20 years? There needs to be some accommodation to ensure that any uses that need redevelopment potential have the ability to do so without having to come in for site-specific amendments every few years and that kind of thing. And then there's the next level of like, should we try to really increase intensity, thinking ahead to metro kind of level, like just increase, not all full metro levels, but should we already be trying to ramp up intensity in anticipation of a future, something like that? That would be a little harder, in my opinion, just feasibility of the transportation network being able to handle it before you have metro, that's the constraint there. But that's something that might, if that's a desire, then that's something that could be tested with the transportation analysis.
Yeah.
But it all depends on what the goals are for which the task force can probably give guidance on. But yeah,
and so that's what I wanted to just check in on, because we're starting to run a little bit low on time, and I did want to give opportunity for the rest of the task force members to offer any comments or questions that they might have. And I think Ryan had also offered anybody from the public that wanted to provide some input to also be able to do so. So just wanted to be cognizant of that, since we're starting to run a little bit low on time. So I don't know if Sam or Sabrina wanted to weigh in particular on anything that we've kind of been discussing tonight.
This is Sam. I'll tell you what, all has been a massive amount of information, obviously, and have a semi amount of prior information coming from the Springfield District Land Use Committee. Have a little bit of on the phase 1, phase 2 stuff, but I appreciate you guys catching at least me up, and I know there's a ton of people on this call on the scope of this and knowing how far we've come and how far there is to go. So thank you, and no questions until I get a chance to absorb everything we spoke about.
Yeah, and just so everyone knows, we will be making these slides available, and so you'll have those to refer to. And of course, I'm happy to, or anyone here on the call, any member of staff is happy to walk through any of this with you. If you have questions, additional things you think of afterwards, or just need any clarification on anything we covered tonight, we're happy to answer those for you. Sabrina, did you have anything, comments or questions or anything?
I didn't. I really appreciated a lot of Mary's questions. She shared some of my questions and some of my concerns based on connectivity, and then not forsaking canopy coverage. We have lost a lot of, I guess, greenery, trees that provided a lot of shade within the last 20 years, and I feel like it's been ramping up as the years go by. We're losing those shade trees and those green spaces. So I think that making a space that is great for folks to visit and for folks who are here to have like the amenities to, have a
Mhm.
great quality of life are really important. So I really appreciate the presentation. And if I have anything else, I will definitely reach out over email.
Okay, good. Thanks, Sabrina. Okay, so if we don't have any more comments and questions from the task force, I'd like to go ahead and open it up to members of the public who might want to contribute. Feel free to use your cameras or your microphones, but we'll also be monitoring the meeting chat as well. If you want to type in your comment into the chat box, we'll be sure to answer those in the order that we receive them. I do know it's a lot of information to digest, but I see Bernie, you've got your hand raised.
Hey, Ryan, thank you for taking my question. I just wanted to see if you could provide, again, just another recap of the timeline moving forward for this study. And, if there are any milestones that property owners and the community can look forward to as the county continues to evaluate and consider all these options. Thank you.
Sure, of course. So in terms of our timeline, as we've got sort of three different projects going on concurrently between the area-wide study itself, the transportation study, and the government center visioning. It sort of takes a careful balancing act to get the correct inputs when we need them at each phase. But generally speaking, we're looking in terms of the government center visioning, looking to develop those scenarios and then wrap up that work in early 2025. And then the transportation study is kind of following a similar timeline. A lot of that will depend on our timeline here to get the transportation scenario for testing over to the consultant, and so that should take a few months there. And then so ultimately we would hope to have this phase 3 effort in a condition to take to the Planning Commission and Board of Supervisors for endorsement and ultimate adoption at this point. I would probably say about spring to summer 2025 is kind of a rough estimate there. But along the way, Bernie, to your point about the engagement for the property owners and the landowners and developers and the public, is that now that we've kind of done this initial analysis and we've done our initial outreach, as we start to develop our scenarios, we'll be able to have a series of public meetings, doing some workshops and things like that, where we can present these scenarios out to the public and really get their input on a lot of these specifics. So kind of taking what we've heard to date and showing the public how those translate into the actual development scenarios is going to be really the key push for the next phase of the project after this. And so, I would imagine we would have another task force meeting and potentially another public meeting this fall, and then we would probably continue that on, I would say, a quarterly basis through the duration of the project. Do we have any other questions or anything that maybe anything that you might have seen in the presentations that we might be missing, or something that maybe if you were a member of the public who took our survey, something that you'd like to highlight for us, or anything at all, really?
Hey, Ryan, this is Marcia.
Hi, Marcia.
I just want to thank you for all of this information. There's a lot of detail there. So I look forward to looking at the slides and going through some of it. But thank you for pulling all the survey information together, showing us the visioning slides. So a lot of information.
It really is. And, with any complex project like this, there's a lot of information. But again, we wanted to be able to present it in a way where we're making the best use of the public time that we have with the task force. So, of course, I'm happy to follow up with anybody if there's questions or comments or anything, because, I myself would not be able to digest this amount of information on my own, so I know I'm not the only one in the audience. So let's see, what I'm doing here is I am typing into the chat my contact information, my email address, ryan.stewart@fairfaxcounty.gov. If for once we get a chance to have the meeting recording posted and the slides posted, if anyone here on the call gets a chance to review those and has some additional questions, comments, or anything at all that they'd like to discuss, please feel free to reach out to me, and I'm happy to answer any of those questions. This is certainly not the only time that we'll have a chance to weigh in here in the study. As I mentioned, we'll have some updated meeting schedule coming out here as we move forward. We do have a project website. The easiest way to get to this is just to Google Fairfax Center Area Phase 3, and it's one of the first few links that pops up under the fairfaxcounty.gov website. That is the most up-to-date source of information for the project. We keep that up to date with all of our prior documents, our recordings, our schedules, our agendas, and all of that. So again, publicly available resource, and it gives additional ways to contact us to provide information there as well. And so I'll hang on the call here in case there's anything else that comes up, but I would like to thank everyone for attending tonight. Really appreciate seeing this strong turnout from both the task force and the members of the public. It's always great to see a high level of interest in our planning projects, because that's what makes these better outcomes in the long run. So again, thank you. I really appreciate your feedback. I think it's been a great discussion tonight, and I look forward to continuing the conversation.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ryan.
Thanks, Ryan.
Hey, Ryan, Tony Calabrese, nice job.
Hi, Tony. Thanks very much. Glad to see you on the call.
Yeah, I didn't think anybody needed to see me, so I stayed in the witness protection program. But Brian Clifford and I will be following up with you, so appreciate your time.
Sounds good.
Have a good
Thanks so
night,
much. Have a
Yes,
good
sir.
night.
See you soon.
Mhm.